Begin our recording. Okay.
Great. I am calling today's Design Advisory Board to order. It's January 14th, 2026. And we'll start with a roll call by the people present on the panel introducing themselves. I'm Brendan Ash, Chair of DAB.
Rory Bilos-Yurkovich, Vice Chair DAB.
Stephen Eckert, no chair of DAB.
I'm Harriet Ingham. I'm a DAB advisory member.
And then there's staff, Kalani Pahoa, board liaison.
I'm Amelia Harvey. I'm the board secretary.
Great, and then we'll just, when Matthew joins, he can jump in.
All right, well, taking one last look, I'm going to go ahead and move forward through some of our setup here. You can see our agenda for this evening. We have a lot to get through. We do try to stay on time. You may see a timer come up on screen for certain portions of the meeting. To start us off, I'm going to go through some rules of decorum and participation instructions for tonight's meeting. The city has engaged with community members to co-create a vision for productive, meaningful, and inclusive civic conversations. This vision supports physical and emotional safety for community members, staff, and board and commission members, as well as democracy for people of all ages, identities, lived experiences, and political perspectives. For more information about this vision and the community engagement processes, you can visit our website. The following are examples of rules of decorum found in the Boulder Revised Code and other guidelines that support this vision. These will be upheld during this meeting. All remarks and testimony shall be limited to matters related to city business. No participant shall make threats or use other forms of intimidation against any person. Obscenity, racial epithets, and other speech and behavior that disrupts or otherwise impedes the ability to conduct the meeting are prohibited. Participants are required to identify themselves using the name they are commonly known by, and individuals must display their whole name before being allowed to speak online. Currently, only audio testimony is permitted online. And if your Zoom account doesn't show your name and you wish to speak tonight, let me know in the Q&A and I can change that for you. So this is a virtual Zoom meeting format. So there are two opportunities tonight for public participation at tonight's meeting. We will announce both opportunities. The chat is disabled in webinar format. However, if you encounter any technical difficulties, you can let me know in the Q&A. We can only accept comments in the participation periods, not through the Q&A, so just know that. When it is time to participate, you can use the raise hand feature, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen. You can see what the icon looks like below. And when it's your turn, we'll unmute you and you'll have 3 minutes to speak. You can also hover your mouse or your finger over the bottom section of your screen to show the control panel to find the raise hand feature. And then a few other ways you can access it is by pressing Alt-Y for PC or Option-Y on a Mac. And if anyone's calling in on the phone tonight, and I don't see anyone doing so, but you can press *9. It's also in the reactions menu, so lots of ways to find it. Okay, back to you, Brendan.
Our December meeting was, we went over our letter to City Council, and we can go ahead and approve those meetings as long as anybody doesn't have any comment. So I motion the approval of December meeting minutes. Anybody second that?
I second it.
Any, anybody in opposition? No. Okay, great.
All in favor?
I great. This is an opportunity now for the public participation for general design advisory board items, not specifically the project that we'll be reviewing.
So if anyone has a comment, use the raise hand feature now, and I'll just give it a couple seconds to see if anyone pops up.
And there will be another opportunity for public comment after we've had the presentation of the project we'll be reviewing.
Okay, I'm not seeing any hands at this moment. Okay.
Okay, great. So the project that we're going to be reviewing is multifamily housing on Broadway, just west of the CU campus, sort of closer to the south end. And the purpose of our design review board is that we want to encourage thoughtful conversation about design and development that for buildings to be more sensitive to the area that they're in, and also meet the guidelines that are proposed by the city of Boulder and or if they have a separate design plan. So we have been tasked with with making recommendations to the applicant. They are advisory, but they can be brought up in future city planning review process. So the way that we're going to be going through our review is a general presentation and overview by staff, then by the applicant, and then we will have general clarifying questions from the board, and then again opening it up for public comment. And then we will begin our discussion about the specific design criteria that we've been asked by City Council to review. And we're going to be going in an order that I have created. And if any DAB member would like to change up the order, then let me know. But right now I have Rory, then Harriet, Matthew, Stephen, then myself. And we have a full board tonight, and so we'll just have to keep our comments concise. If you have sort of repeating comments, then just say that you're in agreement, not necessarily that you agree and then repeat the comment, just in the interest of time. So if we can go ahead and start with the city staff introduction of the project.
I missed one agenda meeting and I get pushed to the front of the line, huh, Brendan?
You're in the hot seat.
I'm good with it.
Oh, Kalani, you're muted.
Is Allison muted too, or is it just my audio?
Allison looks unmuted. I'm not hearing her.
I hear
Okay.
you now.
Yeah, I don't hear Allison at all.
I don't.
Is better?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
My headphones aren't working. That's fine. Um, all right. Well, hi, my name's Allison Blaine. I am the case manager working on the site review at 777 Broadway. I'm just going to do a really quick introduction because Evan's going to walk you through the project, but just give a little bit of background. As you said, the chair said, the project is adjacent to CU Boulder and the New Vista High School, and the existing use on site is student housing. And the project is currently in for a site review given the size of the site and the development, and is requesting a height modification. As such, the building and site design is subject to site review criteria, including the additional criteria for height modification. The project was referred to DAB by City Council at time of concept plan in November of 2024. The design has changed pretty significantly since the concept plan. Um, and although staff did not give explicit feedback on the DAB referral, they did reference concerns regarding some of the open space and general building design. So that's all I have to share now. I'll go ahead and pass it on to the applicant presentation.
Getting promoting Evan again. One moment.
I think I'm all set here. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, you're a little quiet, but we can hear you.
All right, I'll lean in.
Okay.
Am I able to share my screen here?
Yes, you should be able to. And also, okay, yep, you should have the ability to share now. And just for those who are joining us tonight, for your information, you can also look at the tabs across the top of your screen to see different views. So if you're not seeing the shared screen right away, check your tabs on top. And I can see your screen, Evan. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Well, good evening. My name is Evan Borg. I'm with Tabernacle Architecture and Design, the architect for this project. So I appreciate everyone's time and giving me the opportunity to present. I believe everyone's had the opportunity to review the packet and some of the materials, so I won't go, word for word here and revisit, but really what I want to walk through are the design philosophies and also some of the site constraints that led us to where we are today. So located at 777 Broadway, this is the location of the Horizons International Building. It's a student housing specific development, which is really important to highlight as we look at the location and also the kind of design philosophy of the project. We're looking at 218 beds across 61 units, and the project site is just over 1.25 acres. The project located here at item 1 is adjacent to existing multifamily and student housing. But really the most important adjacency for us is being across from the University of Colorado Boulder and highlighting the pedestrian orientation for the project. As we look at the site plan, I'm going to get to this next exhibit here in just a moment, but wanted to call some of the site constraints that are a little more challenging to see in the 2D diagrams, which is first and foremost the topography. So the site has about a 9.5 or 10-foot grade from our neighbor there to the west to this low point that we're calling out that will dictate our building height. In addition, there's a vehicular access, a current vehicular access here located at Broadway as well as 20th Street. And with the new proposed design, we're looking at shutting down our access to Broadway and force residents to use 20th Street, which will allow them to come out to the two signalized locations at Broadway. The reason in doing so, we're again really trying to focus on a pedestrian and student-oriented development. We're We have a unique location here on a multimodal route, being Broadway, but also the multi-use path for pedestrian and bike traffic. And we're located near the tunnel that will get us under Broadway, residents under Broadway, and across the campus. So looking at the existing conditions and starting to layer in some of the site constraints that led us to the mass and the building form, we're required to maintain this 25-foot shared utility easement. Currently, that bifurcates the site in two, so we can't build on top of that, so we have to relocate this. We looked at two different options of running it to the location it is now or along the southern property line adjacent to the New Vista High School site. The reason we chose this layout here is, again, we're seeking to close off the vehicular access and reroute our traffic to 20th Street. The Lux, I will point out, they will still have vehicular access at their drive aisle, so their site will be not impacted. But in locating the shared utility easement at this location, it allows us to push our building further east and away from our neighbor there at the Lux, which helps us create visual separation, but also helps us on the shadow analysis and solar access for the Lux, as well as getting our building further down on the low point of the site to try to bring the perceived building height down as well. The other easement shown here in the yellow is the multi-use path. So we're starting to layer in additional easements. The fire apparatus T-turn with the drive aisle removed from Broadway. We worked with fire. They're going to have to readdress and reroute fire response to 20th Street. So it was important that the fire apparatus was located at that location. And as such, you'll see with the building design, egress points and vertical access for fire be located at these locations as well. So further helping to define where programs should be situated on site. Lastly, we have open space layered into the site plan, which gives way to the resulting form and mass that we'll kind of dig in a little bit more on. With this solar analysis, I'll touch base on these just briefly. There is one area that we will be seeking an exemption on, which is to the east. As you could, if you recall from the previous plan, it's the open field there at New Vista High School. And then because of that easement location, we're able to push our building away from the Lux, and we do not need to seek any easements exceptions with those guys, and we are not encroaching the solar fence. I'm going to cruise through some of the floor plans. Tonight's, we're really looking forward to getting feedback on, I think, 5 main criteria within the application or the Appendix B. So I'm going to reference those here in just a moment. And I think we have one bonus one that we wanted to get feedback on as well. If you guys want to follow along with me, if you have those exhibits able to pull up. The first one I wanted to touch on and share not just the 2D plans, but some of the 3D images would be on Appendix B, page 4, which if you've got the DAB packet downloaded, is page 12 of 60 of that document. This one is the landscaping and screening requirement. So our staff comment was the criteria is partially satisfied. And we're looking at specifically decorative metal panel located at the rear of our property. So as I kind of navigate, and hopefully this does okay with the video, if I need to slow down because of the Zoom, just let me know. We're employing a knee wall design with that meets the required screening height. And then in addition, we're looking to add a metal panel, a decorative metal panel screening, just to further add to the pedestrian experience, both inside and outside of the property. So this comment here on appendix page 4, the landscaping requirement, touches on additional metal screening where we previously were not showing it, and this is the previous design. This is what was reviewed to get to today. This knee wall, while it meets the required screening height, staff recommended that we add and just extend the metal panel around this corner, and I think we're in agreement. I think that would look good, so we're going to plan to make those changes. The next item, number 2, which would be on appendix page 9, or PDF document 17, is related to building massing. So our self-evaluation touches on the building massing incorporates I'll go to a better view, varied parapet heights. We shift material organization to create distinct forms and massing, trying to keep them relatively simple and distinct. And then we're locating rooftop amenity program to further break down the perceived height. We'll look to get some feedback on this criteria as well. We've been working with Allison and her team there at City Staff for the better part of almost a year now on just trying to really fine tune this and be a thoughtful infill development. So we'll look for DAB staff as it relates to this item. I think specifically as we look around, get to a better view. To the eastern and southeastern vantage point, again, we're looking at adding rooftop amenity in this location to further help break down that perceived building height. And then the third of 5 would be on page 10. It relates to transparency and specifically around some of the stair towers where we're, bringing some of that storefront cowl wall transparency, down to the grade. I think there's comments about how we treat this condition at this stair tower location. And I can, as we have questions, reference back what that floor plan looks like, as well as this location here further up the multi-use path. I see Kalani's raised her hand. I may be close to time.
You are close, but I just wanted to check with the board chair to see if they want to reallocate some time and how much time you think you'll need.
Maybe 2 more minutes, just to touch the kind of the 6 areas. I think that was number 3. I've got
Yeah,
2
I mean,
more.
Evan, I think that you're doing a great job of helping me with my job. So I think if you can kind of quickly touch on the other items, that would be great.
Perfect. I'll keep it moving quickly here. I've got my timer self-checking myself and I failed. So the next item is on simple detailing. This is on page 11 of the report, Appendix B, page 19 of the PDF. I think this is actually one I got some additional feedback from Allison on prior to submitting. We didn't make those changes quite yet. We really want the DAB feedback before we go and make the changes and then resubmit to staff. We were looking at more simple and material moves that have depth to them versus coursing and other details. So I look to get feedback on that. I won't say too much more because I think Allison gave me some good feedback as well. So I'd like to hear the DAB comments. Number 5 is building materials. This is item or on page 14. We really work with staff on reducing our building materials that we use and the color palette that we use, trying to simplify that best we can. You can see here on our materials board, it's 3 primary materials, each with 1 assigned color. Where before, previous versions had maybe 2 colors per material type. So I really reduced that down to help soften the facade, still be contextually appropriate in that color palette though. So look forward to comments on that item. And then the last one, which is kind of a bonus item. I say a bonus item. This is on page 16. This relates to the building facade exceeding 120 feet in length. In my self-evaluation, I say that it does not apply. We got criteria satisfied, so I wanted to touch base with Allison on that as well. We use a negative space to our advantage here at the courtyard. We're looking to not be an imposing facade along Broadway, but really use negative space to our advantage to help that building massing break down, as well as invite pedestrians and landscape nature into that front facade. I can stop there. I heard the beep again.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. Are there any questions for Evan before?
I had a question. You mentioned you guys are going for a height variance. Can you explain what that is and what that entails?
Sure. We are seeking the full 55-foot allowance for the height variance and 5 floors. So this structure is 4 stories over 1 level of podium. Our parking is located beneath that podium, as well as some leasing and amenity space, bike parking, and we do locate 2 units on that ground level.
So is this zone not allow 55 feet, or what's the variance you're asking for?
It does. It does allow, but we're seeking that full allowance of 55 feet.
Okay, I'm confused, but
I can step in if it's helpful to
Yeah,
explain.
it will be. Please,
Yeah.
Allison.
yeah, because I'm just what's by right and what's
Sure.
not.
So we do have by right heights. I believe the by right height in this zone is 38. And our charter does allow for up to 55 feet, just it has to be through a site review. So the by right height, it's usually about 35 or 38. I don't remember if it's exact zone. So the height modification is to grant height up to 55 feet.
From 38.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then on page 7, I think, of the PDF is where, Stephen, they have some of the criteria of how you can qualify for
Okay. That you said it was on page 7
of the PDF.
of the
7
PDF.
of 6.
Right.
Yeah. Brendan, did I miss it? Did you guys send a grouped agenda as far as how we want to go through this criteria? Or are we going to go through chronologically as it is in the packet?
We'll have Amelia has prepared the slides for us, and so we're going to be going in the order of the slides.
Oh, I like this. It's feeling so
Mhm.
good, guys. This is
Mhm.
amazing. And that little beeper, I feel like we're on a game show a little bit.
I know. It's really clean. Any, I guess along those same lines, what is the process for the easement variance?
Well, it's just a relocation, right? You're just vacating and proposing to rerun it.
The utilities?
Yeah.
Correct. We're not seeking an approval for that easement. We've already worked that out through site and civil. We have utilities from our neighbor coming across our site, so we're relocating those kind of between us so that they still have utility service. In addition, fire's asking for, another fire hydrant out at Broadway at that easement to help them have coverage down Broadway. So we're not seeking any approval here in the DAB conversation for that location. That's just we need to move it so we have a workable site where before it bifurcated and we had 2 locations that we could build. When we put that against the western property boundary, now we have 1 contiguous space that we can develop.
Okay, so it's not setbacks. It's you're not asking for setback easy. I mean, you're meeting the property line setbacks. Is that?
On the western portion, we certainly are. At the northern, eastern, and southern, we are, I think, tighter than by right.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Do we have any public comment?
We have a few folks listening in tonight, so if you have any comments on the project, just use the raise hand feature. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone raising their hand.
Okay, let's jump into our discussion because I think that there are a few things that we do need to touch on. So first, this project was sent to us by the city council as a referral. They were not very specific, I guess, on the direction of what they wanted to talk about or what they wanted us to discuss. But I think the city staff has given some good direction on what conversation would help, I think, city council understand and feel more comfortable with the design and massing of this project.
So Brendan, let me ask you a question there because I'm on your website here, Evan, and I'm looking at and what's clearly an older rendering of this project. I'd encourage anyone from Dab who's got internet, well, everybody does right now, but to go jump on his website just to see it. I'm assuming this is what was presented to City Council when it was referred.
No, and that's what I was going to make a point. If I'm able to reshare here. Oops.
I'm just curious how much in our packet has already changed since what you
Yeah.
shared with City Council.
So I wasn't part of the team that submitted the initial concept plan. I came in after concept and before site review. So what I'm sharing here was the concept design that was then referred to you guys.
So it's a completely different building.
Correct.
I just think that's important to understand for the DAB folks here that
Yeah.
it's just in some ways it's City Council's sort of commentary and referral is for this building for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think that's good to understand.
Okay, good. Because I was thinking maybe it was the one on your website and that we were on round, version 2.3 or whatever you'd call it. So that's good clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, great. We can jump into the first discussion item. So the first discussion item is about, we're not going exactly in order that because in our criteria, it starts with the landscape screening and the parking, but we thought we'd jump to building design first, and I think it will begin the discussion. I think I would like to begin the discussion with an overall design view, and then I felt like the landscape screening was a little more specific, so I thought we could narrow that down next. So the first is again just about the variety of forms and the general massing of this project and building forms and roof lines, parapet heights, specifically looking at the roof deck, which we didn't really it's not really clear as to how that's programmed. It's less, I guess, prominent than some of the ground floor amenity and outdoor space. But that was one item that we were asked to have a conversation about. So Rory, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, Evan, thanks for, preparing all this and being present here today. I think I think it's worth just starting by acknowledging that, I always try to be on Google Earth during these meetings and just sort of looking around, both in sort of a satellite view, but also experientially. And I think probably some of the sort of direct language and ultimate referral from City Council for this project site is, I mean, you are contributing to one of the gateways to the city of Boulder, Colorado. So this
Mhm.
is the entrance to, you cross Broadway or you take Broadway and you cross Baseline. And this is when you get like the epic views of, the university buildings. You can kind of get a sense of if events are happening at Folsom Field, whatnot. The Broadway takes a very nice arc through here. So it's like got some organic quality to it before it ultimately is going to drop you all the way down into downtown. So, we're looking at this through the lens of a true gateway quality project. And so I think relative to maybe other infill sites, this one is incredibly prominent. So I think personally, I'm going to be reviewing it as I have to drive and ride my bike past it and explain to people that they've arrived in Boulder when they look at this for the next 50 years of the lifetime of this city. Um, so when I look at this criteria that is essentially talking about, creating mass, distinctive massing and variation, especially when the building's big, I also inherently tie it back to what Stephen was asking about, which is the height exemption that you guys are seeking. And in the height exemption, there's several ways that they want you, you have to pick two or whatever strategies to sort of qualify. And then folks get to opine on that. So I think my knee-jerk reaction, and I'm looking at sort of the rendering of, I don't know if that's, well, I'm looking at sheet 42 of 60 in the PDF, just sort of the rendering as if you're driving by at 40 miles an hour on Broadway. And you kind of get the flat irons in the background. So I think
Evan, maybe we want Evan to, if you could pull up those perspective views, that might be helpful.
Sure.
Sorry.
So in my understanding of allowing for relief from the 55-foot height limit is to create diversity and interest. It's not to say, hey, here's your new top of plane and extrude the entire footprint up to 55 and strike it with a wire cutter. To me, it's saying, hey, look, everyone's going to always go up to the 38-foot height limit. They're going to stuff as many of whatever product they're trying to sell into that 38-foot height limit. But boy, that's boring. That's some big, wall of block of cheese of building. So, hey, let's give developers the ability to add interest in order to exceed that 38 up to, we need a maximum. We've got beautiful mountain views up to 55. So I think initially my knee jerk is you guys took your cake and ate it too. You took the 55 not as an opportunity to embellish architecture, but to just continue stamping units all the way up to that datum. If there was more of a crescendo happening, or if there was features on the extremities, something that warranted us saying, hey, 55 feet would be incredible because it's creating this distinctive tower-like mass, or something that creates a real sort of on the south corner entry feature that's almost like an arrival beacon of the city of Boulder, or particularly to the student neighborhoods of Boulder. That's where I think I'm in support personally of height modifications, not just extruding buildings until you can get there. So that'd be sort of one. Two, I think the other criteria is to break this building down into multiple forms, which I think you have some very good base moves, particularly in plan. And I know that they're talking about, there's a lot of the staff commentary is talking about sort of the facade along Broadway and particularly the south side of it. And I realize, we have this roof deck that's sort of at the end of a hallway. So, how useful is it? They're sort of concerned about how it's overshadowed by the stair tower adjacent. But again, even at this level, right? If you squint at this and you're driving by this at 40 miles an hour, that looks like a 55-foot tall block. It's not looking like there are features that were allowed to break the 38 datum to create architectural interest. If you swing back, though, Evan, to the, I guess, east facade, that sort of, I'm calling this sort of the money shot of the project. I think there's a couple of moves that you've already started with mass and plan that I personally would encourage further embellishment to help with one of the criteria is to create distinctive buildings. So if you're going to be this tall, they don't want anything over 120 feet. Sure, you could probably show me on a line how you're justifying that. That's fine. But like graphically, right now, you're almost there, right? You have this right side building, this left side building. You literally have an open court or breezeway on the ground level, and then you reinforce that on the upper level by having the roof deck hyphen. So you've already sort of started with the sandwich bread of negative space, top and bottom, but then you've just completely negated all that effort by taking that stone facade and using it as a bridging link. I would actually think you could further encourage the void nature, as you've described it, to continue to rip these into the appearance of, two distinct buildings. I think that's more in keeping with the spirit of trying to break up 120 foot long building facades into more digestible building forms.
All right. Brandon, how much time do we each get? Are you
Yeah, I
clocking?
didn't hear my buzzer go off. Do I get a
Right,
buzzer
so
too?
we have another 12 minutes to get through.
Okay, but each of us get like what? Like
Well, we
2
have 12
minutes?
minutes to get through 3 of the design criteria.
Oh,
Hey,
jeez.
you put me in line first, so I get the
Well, that was
advantage of using.
that was a great start. Everybody else gets 30 seconds. Go.
Great.
Yes. I think I had Harriet next.
Oh, I'm okay to go a little later. I think Stephen wanted to jump in.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Let's
I'm
get Stephen
next.
in there,
I could jump in if you want me to.
please.
So when I looked at this project, I must say I was like, oh Jesus. One of the contexts of Boulder that's going on right now, there's just a new hotel built by the university, and I like to call it the Darth Vader Hotel. And you've seen it, and it's across from the Moxie Hotel, which is also just built. Moxie was built under city rules. The other hotel was built because they have an exemption for the university. And if anyone has had their ear to the pavement, people in Boulder are not happy about that hotel. It's looming over the city. I think
Limelight.
it's the Limelight. I think it's 8
Mhm.
stories, 7 or 8 stories tall. It's black and white. So I think you should really look at the Moxie and the Limelight in context of each other, because there's a lot of things that the Moxie gets right that you could look at for this building. There's a lot of things that the Limelight are doing that's just maximizing its build out. Now, that being said, one of the things I appreciate that you guys spent a lot of effort here really worrying about pedestrian access on the site, but I'm not sure that that's really the problem here. Like that's going to take care of itself just by the nature of the site itself, right? And where you are in relation to the university. And you have students living here, they're on bikes, they're walking, great. But I'm interested as to why you put the circulation towers on either end of the project, especially the one there that we're seeing right there on the left, which is that's the prime real estate of the whole thing. And it's just crazy to me that the owner you guys didn't have a conversation about, boy, we're not maximizing the units inside with the best views, the southern exposure. We're putting the circulation there. It doesn't make sense to me. And it's also the highest part of the building, right? So if you didn't have circulation there, if you swing around where you're looking, keep going that way. If you keep turning it, I mean, just imagine you can hold it right there. Imagine taking that stair tower out of there, right? And we had the 3 or 4 story mass on the lower right, and then it steps up, and the stair tower is tucked on the western side, right? You're gonna just by definition, you're going to break up that mass because you're going to step up away from Broadway. You know what Rory was calling the money shot. Yeah, that's the front facade, but that's not how you're experiencing it, this building. And yes, the students are going to experience it walking, but everyone else in Boulder, like Rory said, is driving down this street, and this is what they're seeing. And I can tell you right now that everyone's not going to be happy. And that's what the city council is responding to. And it's because we're going from a ball field to 5 stories, 55 feet, and then we step down to the building to the north, which is much lower. And so I wouldn't, if I was in city council, I would not support a height variance here because I don't see the hardship, and I don't see that you're trying to sort of, again, layer the space up. It needs, the highest part almost in this scenario needs to be in the middle of the building. So you could kind of step up and then step back down. So, it's funny. The picture that you showed before, right? Your original design. It's always amazing to me how, I don't know who gets into these designs and starts like critiquing them. We don't get to see it at that level, which is a big bummer, because it's actually moves that you're doing in that first go around that are better than this solution. And we always see that. And I'm always like that happened on the last project we looked at Fraser Meadows. I'm like, oh wow, the original one was actually better. So this is folding, right? That's like folding. And then look at that. You don't have the stair tower on the corner, right? You've got people living there, and you've got the windows on the corner, and that makes a lot more sense to me. And it feels a little bit more like a gateway. You got a big sweeping form from the top down to the bottom. Anyways, I think you know this, and I think, it is what it is. I think having a frank discussion with the owner, your developer, like, we got to get this through, and the city's not going to go for this. So what do we got to do? Well, I'll just leave it at that.
Okay. Matthew or Harriet?
I can build off what Stephen was saying, and I just had a few things to add because I think both Rory and Stephen did a really good job here. Is when it kind of came to this, when I was looking at it, it kind of, to me, it felt like you forgot about the corners, similar to what Stephen was saying. It was like, oh, we need cores. Oh, we'll kind of put them here. That's what I get when I look at this in terms of the impression, and those seem to be the best parts, the best apartments. So I'm not sure why they're used for circulation. And like, I was looking at this, and I couldn't decide whether I thought this looked all right because of the trees or whether it was actually the building. And then when we switched around to the other one, I'm like, oh, it's actually the landscaping that's really helped to soften that. And you don't have that along the other side. And so it does look more blocky and chunky and just big overall. So I think that's all I really had to add, because I think Stephen and Rory kind of covered it. But yeah, for me, the corners were the biggest misses on this one. Over to you, Matthew.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I wish I could give a little more variety, but I feel like there's a consensus here. I'd say in one aspect, I'm to acknowledge and express some support. I think if we're talking strictly this criteria with siding, I think the overlap with the public path and the sort of putting the courtyard adjacent to the path and creating it's almost like a nice park buffer. That feels like a great amenity. And I think that's superior than to having that courtyard feature be tucked off somewhere else on this site in another nook and cranny. Also to acknowledge that, it is a constraint that you have the other residential building sort of parked right there to the west. That kind of closes off that site, and then the long access road. So I do think that naturally forces the project to face the street. Where it's falling down is that The ends of these buildings, I completely concur, do not are not pleasant to look at driving from any or on the bike path from either way. They really look like the sort of dead ends of the end of a building. A lot more attention has been put into the facade in that courtyard, which is actually not that visually accessible to the car driving by at 40 miles an hour or the people biking by at 10 miles an hour. The last thing I would say is I'm also perplexed and concerned about the sort of overexuberance on the height modification. You know, if the height modification were used strategically and sort of set back on the west side of the site away from the street, and these two wings closest to the street conform to our zoning, which, by the way, the residential development very much adjacent has parking underneath the whole thing, and they made the project work within the height limitations. And I think the sort of overexuberance is best illustrated in the presentation. It's the sheet A220 3D views. It's just the white box renderings. But in my mind, that view speaks volume about sort of the difference in scale, you know, along those three buildings there. Whereas the older building furthest to the north is a much older vintage. It's very much oversized and sort of out of scale with current development. And then that building in the middle, which is a few, 10 years older or more, is sort of the scale we're working down to, which I feel like is more appropriate in what this area is zoned for. Yeah, I think that's it for now.
Okay, and then my final review, I would agree on, and also in summary, well, I'll wait for the summary, but I would agree on the sort of missed opportunities that while I appreciate the form of this building creating a lot of opportunity, especially for some south-facing daylight and additional glazing, and it just gives a lot of visual interest and a lot of facade and opportunities for programming to have it in the footprint and shape that it's in. I would say that especially in this view, the sort of the transform or the translation of the programming going from the first level of units up to the top floor, it doesn't quite bother me as much. I think that the added forms, and we are going to be going way over time on this design conversation, but I think that the added massing and the relief that's provided in this design really breaks up the programming in my opinion successfully, and it doesn't, the massing of it and the parapet height. I'm usually the one that makes the comment about the uniform parapet height makes me crazy, but I think in this case the contrasting in material colors, the added awning roofs, and sort of the variety of window sizes and scale, I think it breaks it up enough that it doesn't, the stacking floor plates doesn't visually look like it's doing what it is doing. I think going back to that south elevation, I would agree with Harriet that because it's going to be so close to the property lines, that there's not an opportunity for the landscaping and the softening with the trees like you have on the other elevations. And I would recommend that that gets investigated and studied a little bit further. And then, but this one also it doesn't have the same language of transparency and windows like it does on the east elevation. So I would, suggest maybe bringing some of that language around to break it up, the facade of it a little bit more, so that the south elevation looks, has additional detailing and massing changes that the other elevations have. For example, that the south elevation where you have the sort of white band running vertically is different than right. You have all these others are sort of these masked cubes or reading a little more horizontally, and then that language doesn't quite meet the rest of the language of these white cubes or white bands that do give that kind of relief. So in trying to sum this up, I think that we are in agreement that because this is right adjacent to the brand new New Vista High School and a giant field, but it is, while you're driving into the CU campus, it is the first. Really, it is prominent, and it is one of the first buildings that you're going to see. So I think additional investigation on the design on the ends of these buildings, including circulation. I know it's difficult programmatically to try and relocate these towers that are acting as structurally and egress and all these things, but in order to make them read a little bit less like just big concrete bunker stair towers, and then also just sort of bringing some of the language around from the other elevations. Let's see, in terms of massing and overall, Matthew, I think you brought up a good point on, and I think everybody seems to be in agreement that as it stands right now, that maybe the height variance is not necessarily something that we would prefer not to see. But I think that that's not really our, I feel like that's a little bit outside of our purview in terms of what we can allow or not allow. Our job is to be able to say, if you're going to go for this height variance, these are some suggestions that we have to make it fit into that area a little bit better. And I agree with Matthew in saying that it's not great to be using as precedent or some of these other really tall buildings in that area, particularly on the CU campus with the Limelight, and then that other massive, much older apartment building that is just to the north of it. I think that apartment building, and then there's another one right across the street from the library, east of Broadway on Arapahoe, that was like a kind of a whoopsie. I don't really know how the height of these, I don't know how these got through. And obviously it was way before our time, but there are a couple of apartment buildings in Boulder that I think should not set precedent for height. In fact, they should sort of be a cautionary height and exhibit. Anybody want to add anything else to that summary?
Yeah, I just wanted to add real quick. as you're looking at it right here, it seems that you guys are attempting to break up the mass and the height along Broadway by making it kind of fussy, right? I mean, I keep wanting this building just to be a lot simpler. In fact, as you spun around before to the other side, to the, mountainside, even though they were bigger masses, they were more repetitive and simple. And again, your original design was simpler. And we also tend to see that people make things fussy and busy, but that doesn't necessarily translate into fixing the issue. So think about that.
There was also, in summary, there was Rory mentioned on opportunity where you have the circulation and plan as an opportunity to break up the massing going all the way up the building as well. Okay, now we are in this kind of piggybacks, and I think maybe we can go through this conversation pretty quickly, and I'd like to, if it's okay, combine this transparency conversation that we had, which talks about the glazing on the corners. It's something that we've already touched on a little bit. And then in conjunction with that conversation, if we can talk about the material palette.
One quick
Right.
question is the corner glazing on the stair towers, is it cow wall or is it big glass panels that you're showing in the model? Because I seem to think you were saying it was cow wall, but that's not what's rendered. So I was confused.
It's rendered as like a storefront system, which is like an opaque, semi-translucent material, but we'd look for cow wall or equal.
So cow wall is what you're suggesting, but it's rendered as, because that's a huge difference in terms of the human scale of the panels. Because I think, rendering it in cow wall is going to help that a lot, because cow wall panels are not that big. But anyways, I just was wanted to know which was which.
Amelia, am I moving on to the right next design criteria?
Yeah, did we, yeah, we've already, it's time to talk about the transparency.
Yeah, and I was hoping we could, in the interest of time, talk about the transparency and materials.
Okay.
So if we
So we
want,
have
if you want to
the-
start to kick us off, Rory.
Yeah, wait, so we have the 20% transparency issue, and then can you just flash to the material criteria, just reduce, more simplified material about, yeah. Well, I think as far as transparency, I think a lot of this is really connected to what we're talking about from a massing perspective. So I think it's sort of, in a way, a little unfair to now sort of pick particular corners of the building, for example, that don't feel like they're enough transparency because we've already described them from a massing perspective. So I think this is just going to start to, on the one hand, it's just reinforcing everything that we're saying as we move through the criteria. So I think that may still be helpful, but I'll just try to be brief in that regard. I think, the transparency following the amenity space is huge, obviously, but there's really the amenity space in this building is quite small given what we've reviewed on other projects of this scale and unit count. It's an amenity study lounge on the lower level that's buried in the breezeway that has the amenity yard. So you could argue that the breezeway itself is sort of the transparency. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I noticed that you take that as a hyphen through the roof. And so I'm actually just looking for more transparency to reinforce that vertically if we're going to remain, which I think for me personally would also tie back to you from a height limit, height exemption, breaking down 120-foot facades in a way that actually are creating more chiclets of buildings. And I loved whose ever suggestion was to sort of like, then you start to treat each, what in massing and character appears like individual buildings, they step in height. And so maybe, you know, again, I understand there's an economic program to this to make this a real project, but could that small amenity lease footprint be the smallest, you know, the most conforming of the height? And then we use this sort of transparency for the breezeway and the amenity spaces that it reveals to then step up to taller building forms that have additional floor plates, particularly as we move west, but maybe even as we move north. So I think you're sort of set up for success in that. There's sort of, to me, it reads as three distinct masses, and that there's just some, I think all the effort that you've gone through from a massing and floor plan perspective to sort of generate the ability, the skeletal structure for three distinct masses, you've sort of created a layer of ambiguity by, like I said before, bridging materials across them, where I think you should be reinforcing how they're separate. Then when we get further into the glazing component, it's yeah, like the prominent facades of the building need to be more glazed, which goes back to this whole corner discussion. I think again, I'm not saying I support the city council design that was originally referred to us because I can see why they referred it. But you know, in any good hotel or multi-unit development, you know that end cap real estate tends to be the most valuable for a reason because it's got, you know, the ability to glaze three sides of it potentially. And so I think there is some restructuring of the vertical circulation that will lend to the first criteria we looked at and then to this transparency criteria inherently. As far as the materiality, I mean, it feels like I mean, again, especially in the context of what was flashed that you did not work on. And just to be clear on that, Stephen, Evan did not work. At least that's what I thought I heard, that you were not a part of that original model that had the good old mural on the wall that no one knows what to do with. So the materiality used here, I mean, I appreciate that you're looking to use like a Colorado sort of high plains desert inspired color and buff sort of textural form. So I guess inherently I'm not objecting to the material palette. And I do think it's been distilled really to kind of three plus glass, which I think again, as long as there's some more consistency, once you get the program pieces in the right parts to start identifying these as, you know, smaller building masses that allow you to pick which one you make crescendo to actually go for a legitimate height exemption. Then I think you layer in Brendan's comment about like there's some moves you've done on what I was calling the money shot facade, the east facing one, that should be pushed consistently around the building. We shouldn't just see these like one off that the west wing, that south facade where it's sort of like it just is, all right, we're gonna go 4-story stripe on that one. I think we should look for some consistency there. So I think that will help distill the use of materials, but I don't have anything inherently objective to the amount or nature of these materials.
Okay, Stephen,
Sure.
can you talk about massing, the transparency, and then materials?
Okay. I don't have a lot to say about the massing as far as the transparency goes, except the nice thing about CalWall is that you get mass and transparency, so it's kind of cool. It's awesome, and I think that would definitely help bring some human scale into it. I'd like to go, if you could go to the materials page. I don't know what page that is they had the materials board.
Yeah, let me pull that up.
Okay. So again, yeah, we can see the cow wall there, right? And you can see how that scale really is quite different than what you're showing in the Massey model. So I think that would be good. The fiber cement siding, I think definitely look at the colors, you know, and I'm not, you know, I am serious about kind of the reaction to the Limelight Hotel, and there is that black and white, you know, sort of going on, and maybe that could be a lighter color, and that could help something. The one thing, Kalani's going to laugh because she knows I'm going to talk about the vinyl windows. I I just do
That's
not
okay.
understand how a developer owner could be even pondering vinyl windows on a building like this. So you can't use black vinyl in Colorado. It will last about 5 to 8 years. The sun just hammers it. It'll turn to chalk. Um, they're I like to call them PVC windows because that's what they are. They're made out of PVC. They're terrible environmentally. And thermally, they move in Colorado. We get, 40, 50-degree temperature swings. And so they look great in the test, but they're terrible thermally. They leak, and most owners that I know end up replacing them in 10 years. Now, if they're willing to do that to save money now, great. But I would go with fiberglass is, the next step up. Better yet, aluminum clad. But obviously that's a cost issue. But if you're spending the money on the storefront and cow wall and some of the other features, definitely look at the vinyl windows. They will be a maintenance problem, especially with students. I can tell you that right now. And I know this is probably out of the purview, but highly recommend not doing vinyl windows. I like your screening. I think is a great idea. I think that'll be really interesting, and you can, there's lots of different patterns that you guys could look at that could be a great tie-in to all kinds of things. Just don't do the flat irons. But yeah, that's all I have to say.
Okay, then I think we did Harriet.
Yeah. Only comment on the glazing is that I think away from the corners, I don't really have an issue with it at all. It's just those corners. But like in the main chunk of the building, yeah, it's an apartment building. Like it kind of does what it needs to do. The materiality, I think Rory said this, it's a little hard to comment exactly on, like if things do move, it's kind of hard to say, like I don't want to give comments that maybe aren't going to be relevant anymore. But I think there's one elevation where it looks particularly blocky. Which I think is along like where you've got it around the field. It is very just like there's only the two of the materials are really brought into the elevation, I think, in any
Yeah,
significant.
it's that vertical stripe facade right there.
Yeah. So I just that one little vertical bit on the left-hand side, kind of, I think that's the only time you really see it on that facade. So it looks a little bit disconnected, or it's kind of just been, swiped down the building without really thought to how it overall fits in. Whereas I felt like on the complete opposite facade, it kind of worked, like it was all fitting in a balanced amount. But yeah, that's all I have.
Matthew.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I feel like I concur with most of that. I think where the fenestration, where the rhythm, and if I can stick strictly to that, I think where it kind of falls apart again is at the two prominent end caps of the building. The sort of patterning of the residential windows has a natural rhythm, and I think the cladding scheme is working with that. When you get to what I guess we're calling the cowl wall sections, I think it all just sort of falls apart. And I think that's part of why these end cap, having the stairwells just sort of tacked onto the end, that's always going to be hard to deal with anyway. It really interrupts the rhythm of what you're doing with the building. So it looks like, residential building in the middle with then kind of a whole different scheme of vertical circulation tacked onto the end. So I would say, hopefully to be constructive about it, I would look for a way to integrate rather than differentiate those end caps. That cowl wall is not really it's not the right proportion in my mind to achieve the city comment, the criteria which is talking about sort of calming things down and integrating better. So I would look at sort of, rather than differentiating them, finding a way to absorb them into the overall rhythm that you've got, which is successful in the main program areas, which, you know, like I said, is a little bit easier to grid out because it's a repeating program. So I hope that's helpful.
Okay, I know that I said that I wanted to talk about the specific parking screening later, but we haven't really touched on the fact that this massive building is sort of floating on air, in having that transparency through the parking area on all the levels. I am not sure that having, you know, the partial height screen wall carries the language of the massing and of the building to the ground and grounds it like I'd like to see. I'd almost like to see some additional, like, you know, translation of the vertical mullions that we're seeing in some of the elements above, making, instead of having sort of this horizontal screen wall on top of a knee wall to screen the parking. I'd like to see some, you know, like vertical elements with that screen wall maybe as infill rather than having just the kind of eyebrow of this building floating above, like where you have the on this elevation where you have the amenity space and the leasing office. That building feels really grounded to me. And then when you get over to the parking, the building floating above and looking at the tops of cars, it just is not visually very appealing to me. I feel like some of that massing needs to be brought down. While I like the materiality of that screen wall, I would just like to see maybe that building isn't floating on top in those couple of those areas. And then going into the materials very quickly, I am concerned about having too many different materials for the windows, especially. You know, if we have a storefront, you know, dark bronze storefront system, aluminum storefront system, and then we're going into the cowl wall, and then we have these vinyl windows, I would agree that the vinyl windows don't match the language of the storefront. So I would say that the windows need to, and there's so many of them, the windows need to have the same language. I think that there needs to be a common materiality language for the windows. In my mind, I would rather see that be, you know, metal clad, something that speaks to the storefront a little bit better and integrates it a little bit better. And again, that black vinyl is not going to look like that very quickly. And then I think the cowl wall, I'm just struggling again. We've sort of introduced an additional language of window system, and like what Matthew said, I think our objective should be more integrating and using some of the language that we already have in this building instead of differentiating these end caps and introducing this sort of translucent cowl wall element that might not, that it just seems to be now we're getting a little bit fussier. So I would say in conclusion, I think that again, the end caps need to be, the prominent elevations need to be studied a little bit more, integrated into the entire design, but also featured and detailed, and by providing additional transparency, whether that's with the cowl wall. I think some of the board members would like that idea, and then or by integrating it with more kind of storefront language and but also just kind of pulling the rhythm of the materials and the glazing and the transparency around the entire uh, facade and the entire all of the elevations in this building. Um, let's see, transparent a suggestion was made for the transparency, maybe to vertically translate or follow some of the amenity spaces or circulation spaces. I think that there's an opportunity to make these with transparency and with additional glazing, but and detailing, there's an opportunity to make these distinct masses instead of the bridging of materials that are, spanning from mass to mass. I think it will also make the underpass from the north courtyard into the south courtyard feel less um, kind of repressive. I think if there's an opportunity to make that feel a little bit lighter. Again, we have so much floating building happening that if you can kind of translate vertically these features into the transparent parts of these first floor could be helpful in terms of overall massing and also just sort of grounding of the building. Um, let's see. Um, am I missing something? Dab, do you have any additional in conclusions? No. Okay. Um, and then I think the final element would be uh, the screening that I've kind of opened up the conversation for.
We have two more criteria in there, but you covered
Oh,
the height modification, which was partially covered at the beginning, but we still want to go over that particular one.
yeah, so I want to talk about the height modification last, and then I was going to go to the first site design criteria with the screening. Is that right?
I have the
So
right slide up, Brendan. Does that look right to you?
um, let's see.
That's the one we were just on.
Yeah, I think we've covered that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, building design, building materials. Um, yeah, and then site design. Sorry, Kalani, am I missing something here?
No, this is the screening one you were looking for?
Yes, this is the
Okay.
screening one.
Yeah.
Okay, so this was again a conversation about the metal panel needing to be carried to the south, so it's screening has additional screening on it between New Vista High School and parking. So Rory, I don't know if you have the thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull up a site planner if he has. Have your 3D view available by chance in that area?
Yeah. I tried to touch on this at the beginning. I think following receiving this comment, our design team is in
Already
alignment.
incorporated. Yeah.
Yeah, with um, pulling this metal panel, that kind of runs through the courtyard. It really separates the pedestrian areas from the parking.
Sure.
But to be consistent, just to pull it across this knee wall as well, and add to the design.
I'm trying to figure out exactly where your transformer is. Is it showing in this model?
It
It's,
does.
I see your trash enclosure.
Yeah, so this is coming from 20th Street down the flagpole. We have trash located in two surrounds, trash and recycling, and then we have the transformer located with landscape screening.
I always laugh.
Yeah,
This
I mean,
should be an Excel problem, not the architect's problem.
yeah,
If
I
we
was gonna
could
say,
show
like,
Excel where we can put it, then it would be
there's
great.
a lot of criteria and access requirements, fire separation. I mean, the other one, there's one when you first come in on Highway 36, it's off to the east. And clearly someone didn't think about it because right next to a glass wall, there's a 8 foot tall CMU block wall to protect it from like a blast scenario just right on the front facade. So
I know that one.
I guess I'm not seeing anything here to provide any comment on. I think the additional screening for the parking areas makes a lot of sense to me,
Mhm.
particularly on the heels of what Brendan was describing. As far as the transformer, I appreciate that it's on this facade of the building. It's buried down the flag lot. Um, and the ability to screen it outside of landscaping is quite challenging
Mhm.
to preserve access and fire separation and things. So I don't think I have any additional comments or input.
Even,
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that doing the panels, the metal panels will help a lot, and I think that's a good move. And yeah, I don't have any additional to add.
I agree.
Yeah, I concur as well. I feel like this is um, sort of low-hanging fruit type of solution, considering some of the other things we spoke about. So yeah, I concur with the previous comments, actually.
does anybody have any, uh, wanted further discussion about the kind of floating over like maybe making that the panels read more, um, not quite so horizontally, and so that the building's not looking like it's floating? Or is that
Yeah, I
just,
mean, there's just so much to unpack there. So, like, I mean, to me, right now, the screen is an infill material, and then you're not even filling it in all the way. Like, you're taking it up a certain portion of void in the building. And I think, Brendan, your guidance, and without us sitting here designing the building, because we've done meetings like that, and you look at the clock and it's 9 o'clock. So the yeah, I saw Stephen got a little nervous there. Did you see that? The like honestly, like incorporating them as features of the building, like Brendan's describing. Like, what if they were like a rain screen that helped, like it was like a shade screen or something that reinforced one of those voids. It ran all the 4 stories up the building, then came down and hung to be part of the screen of the parking in certain areas. Then it sort of spirals out horizontally to like screen more of just like the utilitarian purpose, but then becomes a feature again to like accent a vertical moment. Like that's the level of integration that we're not just, hey, there's some holes in the bucket so we puttied them with a screen. You know what I mean?
I think it could be the columns too. Like, look, because you're showing, if you go to one of those views, you're showing, I guess, wrapping the columns with block. Is that what you're showing? I mean, in some ways, going, sort of following the building to the north where you have the, round, big sonotube columns might actually, they're like sort of integrated, but I don't know. Somewhere where you can see the square columns that you have in the parking area, there was like another view. But um I mean the problem is here is you have that offset, right? So it's tricky to integrate it.
Yeah, I
Um
mean, but like
and
it could be
again, I
as
don't think you
simple.
want to get too fussy. Like I mean, if I was looking at this, I would just be like, hey, I know I don't want you to come out of this meeting like, oh God, these guys are all a-holes and now what do we do? But like
That ship
the
has sailed,
first
Stephen.
the first step, can we just go simple? Like just do like I actually appreciate the back of this building because it's a lot more simple and straightforward. It's not trying to solve all these problems. Does that make sense? And the same with this kind of thing. Like what's a simple solution rather than adding layers and layers of complication. And I think that will help it.
Okay, so I would say that in conclusion, that we like the recommendation of the addition of the screening on the south facade that is currently missing. And then if there's a simple and elegant way of integrating the facade of that parking in certain areas and not necessarily the same way, all the way across the parking garage, kind of the way that it's being addressed right now. But if there's a way and opportunities to integrate it vertically into the design, that would be encouraged. Okay, so now I think we can go to the height modification conversation. Because this is a large floor plate and exceeding 120 feet along a public street, they have to meet two of the following design criteria. So type of dominant color, material or color, scale or orientation of that material, facade recessions and projections, locations of entrance and window placements, roof forms, and building height. So again, I think that, as I stated before, I don't think it's really within our right or purview to say that whether or not we think they should be granted the required height. I think that we need to say that realistically, do they meet two of those design requirements? And or is there an opportunity to make some of these moves that we've already discussed, to kind of minimize the massing or the feel of the overall design or the overall requested height? Rory?
Yeah, I mean, I opened up the whole review with this piece, so I'm happy that we're revisiting it because this, to me, is by far the most important topic of tonight's discussion. Again, when I look at the criteria, A through E, so they want you to essentially take a building that is this long. If you are asking to now make it taller than the code would allow by right, they want you to break it into more digestible forms. And they're leading the witness with 5 ways to do that. You can break it down into different materials to start to create distinction. So it's a collection of smaller buildings. They're telling you can recess the facade or have projections, which I think you've done. You've got some really good examples of this, like where you're trying to use the limestone as like these block masses, which I think is cool. And I think Brendan already commented, like, be consistent with it. Returning the corner makes them look like these large, beautiful block objects. And there's several corners we've interrupted with stairs, or you just didn't carry it around the corner for some reason. We talk about roof forms and the building heights, and those are really the big ones for me. I mean, we're all parapeted roof forms. We don't see a single roof try to shed or gable or provide any other character. And all of them are the exact same height, with the exception of 2 small roof decks that get lost in the squint level elevation. So I think I would just leave it, Brendan, I sort of agree with you, right? We're not here to approve, we're not a quasi-judicial board, so we're not approving your request for a height limit. But what we are doing is trying to provide meaningful feedback for those who do approve it to look at it quickly based on our professional guidance. I personally think that, in my professional opinion, the height limit is to create interest above the prescribed heights, not to just create a new datum with which to extrude the entire building to. So I would like to see you use it not necessarily sparingly, but appropriately. The 55 should be embellishments, and whether it's at the peripheries or the center as a crescendo or as a break, that's up to you and the design team to incorporate. But right now, all I see is a new top of building datum that everything's been extruded to.
Guess I'm next again.
Yeah.
Yeah, we sort of had this discussion before, so I really think it is about the corners and how you can address them, and there really is a sort of a political background here and pushback amongst people in Boulder. And this is a very sensitive subject, so you have to nail it. It has to be like, wow, this is great. We don't care if it's 200 feet tall, we want it. Like it's really that. And with it's sort of like with a great site comes great responsibility. I mean, this is a prominent site. I can't, Rory hit on it. It's definitely the entry to the university right there in a sense, and people are going to react if they don't like it. And there's been a lot of negativity around some of the larger buildings in town, and so I think you got, especially the one going, coming from the south, driving north on Broadway, you got to nail that one and just make it great. And then it will take care of itself. But otherwise, you're going to be fighting, this battle, and they're not going to approve it. I mean, that's all I can say.
Yeah, I kind of feel like we've covered it all here. But yeah, that southeast elevation where it just is very confrontingly right up against like the same elevation, and it's all the full height of the building along that whole thing, other than that one small rooftop patio space. Just it makes the building seem big and very different to the field that's in front of it. So I agree with everyone else that there's going to be some strong reactions to that.
Yeah, I would add, sorry, I'm sort of going back to my main critique. I think all along, I do think if the height exemption is taken and those end caps are emphasizing 5 stories of straight up to 50 feet, I see a strong argument. I know it impacts parking and internal circulation, but if there's any way to relocate the stair cores off the side of the building, that would open up so many more opportunities for massing and balconies and windows that you and roof forms. I think there would be more tools to deal with this apparent height. This is going to feel like a huge building, especially passing from south to north, from the open field and our RL2 zoned residential areas, RL1 and RL2. If this building doesn't sort of step up in height and massing or provide some relief, it's going to be perceived as like, really tall. The final thing on this point is, the criteria, the staff, I tend to concur with the staff review on this particular key issue, which is that, for the most part, the variety of color, scale, and material is being used here as a sort of modifying feature. So are facade projections and recesses and the location of entrances and windows to a lesser degree, in my opinion. But I think I'm guessing that I won't speak for the council, but I think the intent that we're dealing with here is, unless we address roof forms and building height in some meaningful way, we're not quite meeting the sort of intent of this key issue. And that's what I'm reading, sort of from the whole situation on this one. So, I hope that's helpful. My reaction, I can't help it because I'm a designer, is my gut feeling is that the placement of the stair towers is sort of leading to a lot of this this massing and perception of building height. And maybe that's an area which can help provide some relief if those are moved or dealt with differently.
Okay, so in conclusion, and I think this was a good one to kind of wrap up our overall discussion about massing in general. You know, I think that it sounds like the board would agree that there is opportunity for additional height step downs that were, and not necessarily keeping all the height at the end caps where the stair towers are, where you're going to need all that height, but creating or providing an opportunity to have the ends kind of step down and not read quite as uniform of a mass of a building, where some program on the fifth floor is reduced or eliminated in order for maybe some of the height to be more centralized in the project. I think, Stephen, you said that on one of the first comments, and then some of that height is given the opportunity to erode a little bit and fall as you go to the ends of the end caps or the ends of the wings. And that might require a study or relocation of the stair towers, because that seems to be it keeps coming up in this conversation. And then again, emphasizing the concept of using the materials and using the transparency and all the things that we've talked about tonight as an opportunity to really break up the mass as a whole. I think each facade is really successfully broken up with the materials and the contrasting materials and the projections of materials. Again, like the cubes in contrast with the storefront or kind of the Nishiha siding, right? Not what we had. So I just think that there is some additional opportunity to kind of look at each of the legs in more just three distinct elements, rather than kind of bleeding the language horizontally across the three different legs. Could help when you're looking for this height variance to make the building feel a little less massive and more like three buildings instead of one huge building. But I think overall, I mean, when at first glance, looking at the elevations, I mean, we keep calling it the money shot. I mean, I think the design is good. We've really seen some doozies for student housing come across this board, and some really, really massive projects that again might have a little bit more amenity space. They also have a ton of units. So I think that in terms of like the design and the detailing is really successful particularly the east facing elevation. It would just be a matter of studying it a little further, and then continuing continuing that language going across all the other elevations. But I think I mean I like it. If anybody else has additional conclusion comments before we let Evan jump off. No. Evan, do you have any?
I'll just say quickly, I don't want to beat the point, but I'll second Brendan. we've been pretty tough on a couple aspects of the project for the reasons we stated. But I do think I will acknowledge it. It looks like a challenging site to design. So by all means, there's obviously a lot of things we didn't talk about that are working with the project. So I always hate, applicants and the public listening to go away from these meetings thinking that this project isn't doing some things right. And unfortunately, we couldn't spend more time talking about those things. But I think it's important just to acknowledge the hard work that applicants, designers put into this. And I'm very confident that, hopefully you can take something from our input, add some value to the project. And when you get back in front of council, they'll see something that, hopefully is a value to the community and everyone is proud of that's been involved. So just a quick commendation on all those efforts.
Well, thank you. I appreciate all the feedback and all the dialogue tonight was very concise with the kind of recurring theme. So it's got my wheels spinning. I'll get with the team and I appreciate everyone's input and I think that's the nature of architecture, right? You talk about what's not working so you can get it right. So in that respect, I appreciate everyone's time.
Great. So our recommendations will they get to you in the form of our meeting minutes, which is why we've tried to have a record in the recording, and then also for the meeting minutes, we've tried to summarize each of the items as we go. So you should have those soon. And then, yeah, unless you have anything else, we have a few additional board items to go over that you are welcome to stay for, but you are also welcome to to jump
He's
off.
dying to stay.
Well, thank you again. I appreciate everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a great night.
Right.
Okay, so Amelia or Kalani, you want to do the last?
Yeah, some board matters.
Yes.
So
I just want to say something quickly. Sorry, I just have to transfer to my phone, so I'm going to do
Okay.
that as I go. But if you see me leave and come, just know that I'm listening.
So for the board retreat, we're trying to get a sense of when is a couple of options, just month-wise, that might work for the board. And it'd be great if we had two options, like if it's June and August or October and, March. We can send out a doodle poll for you all to fill out if that would be better. But we want to try to get something as far as a division for planning and development services. There's multiple boards we're managing, and we'd like to try to get those retreats on the calendars and that kind of thing.
Can you remind us what the retreat is?
Typically, the retreat will go over like how this board has been going over some of the things that they want to cover, whether it was recommendations out of the your letter to council or how you're reviewing projects. But it may be that you don't feel like you need a retreat for the year, and that's okay too. If there's other boards have projects that they might be working on independently that they like to go over during their retreats. And it could be something as simple as having one of the board coaches come in and help the board with meeting management. There's those two.
I think a retreat would be great. I can't remember how many hours, if it's a couple hours, is it something like that, or?
It'll be scheduled during this board time. So,
Okay. Oh, all right.
So it'll
it's
take
like
the place of a regular board meeting.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important. I feel like there's some things that we may want to come up with that might be enhancements or tweaks to the criteria that would, go the other way. Like, hey, we keep seeing this, but
It's a
we're
good
not
time to
doing it
take
that way.
it's a good time also to take your list that you're keeping your parking lot, Stephen,
Right.
and maybe go over that parking lot in preparation of sending it forward. So
Right. That'd be good.
that's
I just have vinyl windows on there right now, but besides that, outlawing them. But yeah, no, that would be good. I think it's important. I think a doodle would be good. Although if it's the same
we just need a
meeting
month.
time anyways, then
We just want to try to figure out because we're trying to see if we're gonna try to get everybody into the same month. So
right.
so we'll send out a doodle poll for a month. What month is a preference? And we'll go from there.
I mean, if we have a month where we don't have a project, that's great, right? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if we'll have that much flexibility if we're going to try to get it on the calendar prior. So
right.
that's why we're doing this.
Okay.
I'll send that out. And then, so look for that in your email for myself or Amelia. And then as far as board recruitment, that has opened up. And so if you know of anyone that's interested, it is an open seat for any community member that resides within the city that's lived in the city for a year or more, and they're over the age of 18. So
I went and did they had an open house at the East Boulder Rec, and we sat and, people went around to the different boards that for the city. And I think, we were overlooked a lot. I don't think any, people at large don't understand what we do or even know that there is a design review board. And then when I described it, I think that they were sort of really hesitant and nervous because the conversation is so much design, and just having that kind of vocabulary and that language. And I kept saying, well, we of course we love diverse perspectives, and everybody wants to see development in the city of Boulder that's appealing, but the conversation does tend to be design heavy, and that there is a language for it for sure. So I think it would be great if our board can put the word out for active recruitment, people that we think would be a good fit for our board. Because after that open house we had, I'm not really sure we're going to get too many applications. So it would be great to have several applications to choose from. Would be really nice in general. And then Amelia and I were talking that it might be kind of cool. You have to be over 18. So, what if we had a graduate student or a TA or a student, at CU that lives in Boulder, and having them be a part of the conversation, it kind of would bring an element of like a higher level academia, and it's been a while since any of us were in school. So
They'd have to be a resident though, right? So they'd have to have their address located here.
yeah,
Is that
for a
a
year.
nuance? Yeah.
yeah.
So if it's a junior or senior,
Maybe
Oh,
If they move their residency though, right?
if they're in state, yeah, as
But
board,
also, don't we have a 5-year term?
that could be tricky for them.
I was going to say for young people, like you kind of move a lot in that time period. You don't know where you're going to end up working or all sorts.
But my wife teaches at EMBD, and I'll talk to her because there could be a faculty member that hasn't thought about it, and this would be a great thing for,
Or if you have a grad student, there might be a
Yeah.
grad student
that would be good too.
just diving
Yeah,
into
guys. I
5-year
had
program.
childcare extended till 6, but it's a hard stop for me. So I'll catch up with you guys soon. Thank you.
okay.
Thanks.
Thanks, Rory.
Kalani, can I ask one quick question about the residency? Because we have someone in our office who would be great, but she lived in Boulder for like 3 years, and then she had to go to grad school because she's Chinese, and so she lost her visa. But now she's back, but she's only been here for like 6 months. Does it like continually for the past year, or is it like if you used to live here and you're still?
I don't actually know. It says resident for 1 year, so you could just give them the application on our website, on the DAB page. You could just send her the link. have her fill it out and then see, or there's also the
Yeah.
contact over at the office.
Right. And
I'm not
explain.
sure what the stipulation is for those.
Okay.
But it can also be, if you have it doesn't have to be a design professional. So if you know someone, and there's a wide range of design interests in the built environment, right? So
Sure.
it could be someone that's an interiors person, or even just someone that's active in the design community,
Right.
and they're not a professional.
Yet another engineer to support me.
Right.
There's that.
That's right. We got engineers.
So
Harriet, you're
There's some-
holding down the whole engineer discipline sector.
I have to
or
represent
landscape
everyone. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know any landscape designers or landscape
Yeah,
architects?
the landscape would be a great perspective to have because so much of what we
Yeah.
talk about is really
So if you know of anyone
led
that
from.
is an ASLA member, you can ask them to see if they know anybody.
Or
A
planning.
builder would be great too. There's lots of builders that are, excellent at design that.
Builder, yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. Because I mean, when I looked around the room at the other time requirements and some of these other boards, like this is pretty low key. I mean,
Yeah,
we're
there's-
really, it's not planning board, that's for sure, where we're meeting 3 nights a month and then some. So it's a good board to be on, and
Going till 1 in the morning.
yeah, exactly. And everybody seemed to feel like we had good chemistry, and so it would be nice to have lots of applications to kind of interview and pick from.
When does
and
it
I'm kind of
close?
curious, Amelia, do you know the date that it closes offhand? I thought it was March 4th or the first week of March.
That's when they appoint the new members. Let me check.
Oh.
I think it's February or
Okay.
late January. Let me double check.
Oh, that's
It's
soon.
soon. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious though. We had 2 people in the attendees list that were listening.
Hmm.
And so I don't know if they were watching we've had that before where when the applications open up, folks will watch the meeting to see. So it's possible. Brendan,
That's
you
what I
came in
did.
person that one
I
time.
came in person.
Yeah.
And then
So,
the country was shut down.
There you go.
January 25th at midnight.
January 25th. Okay, good to know. So they got like 10 days.
they have 10 days. So
All
spread
right.
the word. And that's all we have for board matters right now.
Any word back from the city council, or how does that happen? Or
Not
is it
yet.
just sort of their whim?
They have them. They had a retreat. The retreat may be online. You can watch the retreat
Okay.
and see. But it was I think it was this week, right? I believe it was Monday and Tuesday this week. Or maybe it was I don't think it was last week.
That's good. Well, hopefully we'll hear back. If not, then I'm going to implement our 3-minute at the council meetings. We'll just show up and endlessly and do our 3 minutes over like 3 council meetings. We're back. But
So that's where we're at right now, as far as like status.
cool.
Right. And we don't have any other calendar checks right now.
That application for the J Road is not.
We don't know yet. The application closes next week. So next week, Wednesday. So
Oh, is that on the corner of J and
yeah.
like 36
Mhm.
or 28, 36? Oh, okay. That's a big one.
So that's it. That's all we have. And we don't have a calendar check right now. So look for a survey from us
Mhm.
on preference months.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Amelia, and Kalani both for pulling together those slides. I think they were really helpful to
No problem.
guide the conversation in terms of, so I'm not
Yeah.
flipping back and forth to what the staff review is and what we're
Yeah.
supposed to be, the criteria and all that stuff. I thought it was great. Very
We'll make a
helpful.
few more tweaks during the next agenda meeting on it. So
Yeah.
like every time it's a little bit, we'll try new things. So,
Okay.
all right.
Awesome. Well, thanks.
We'll have to adjourn the meeting.
Meeting is adjourned.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, Brandon.
Bye.